about the debate about feminism.
Yeah.
So I believe
Of
that.
course, you started off, and then I'll be able to just respond, but I will not respond in a negatory. I will respond kind of in the affirmative, just to reiterate, but from my own perspective, and then we can jump into more of the territory where we might have difference of ideas.
Sounds perfect. So in my view, feminism is advocacy for the liberation of women socially, politically, and economically. So any activity that advocates for the liberation of women in those three fields, I consider under the feminist ideology. So I take that as the correct position morally, pragmatically, and also it applies currently. So that's basically my opening statement. I equate it with morality because it's about fairness, which I think is basically a fundamental right. Um, it's pragmatic, so it gives everybody in society. Feminism just gives women a chance to have equal rights along men. So that's the pragmatic part. And then currently, there's just a lack of women in political power. Sexism still exists, and there's been definitely movement towards a more equal society, but there's still some work to be done. And then at the same time, third wave feminism is about inclusivity and intersectionality, which expands the benefits of feminist movements to all kinds of women, different races, different backgrounds, class, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
So that's it.
Okay. Oh yeah, I enjoyed your. Obviously, I'm on behalf of the same ethical inclination. I do believe that it is the moral. It is 100% the correct position for all of society to have. However, I'm familiar with some of the anti-feminist
You're kind
arguments.
of cutting
I
out a
can
little
either
bit.
give you
Sorry.
arguments in this way. Okay, okay. I'm sorry. Do you? If I talk slower, does it stop? Does it
No,
just
it's
keep
that your
getting at
mic is
different
cutting
speeds?
in and out.
Yeah, it could be because there's wind out here. When I get back in my car, I'll be able to talk fully.
Okay,
Yeah. It's probably not me and my car a little bit more. It's probably the wind. I'll get back in
cool.
it. It is definitely the position that I also agree with. It's just the application of it. That's the area. The application of it. That's the order. That's usually the area of disagreement amongst society. And so we first should identify that neither of us are ever going to say that a human being deserves to suffer because of the way that they were born or the way that they identify. So neither of us is ever going to do that. But when we talk about the application of enforcing feminism onto this world, you and I both agree. Obviously, if it's something that hasn't happened throughout human history and now it's starting, well,
Yeah.
then there's always going to be someone who doesn't benefit, someone who has to lose, and these people usually are unrighteous, bad people. But there are some righteous people who have some things to lose as well. And so perhaps because obviously you're on the affirmative and I would be too, perhaps you'll find some arguments that I say that are on behalf of those who have something to lose. But I have nothing to lose from feminism becoming fruitful in this world. So even if you hear an argument from me, don't think that it's my argument. Just know it is the argument against it, and that I'm just knowledgeable of it, and that's why we're talking about it. Cool.
Yeah, totally cool. In fact, I'm looking forward
Cool.
to receiving that knowledge, something
Heck
that I've
yeah, heck yeah. Because I'll
learned.
be able to articulate it pretty well as well, depending on wherever the conversation kind of goes in specifics. So with you as the affirmative and me agreeing with you in this way and me sharing you with you the area of difficulty of agreeing, now that your statement is over, we can kind of move into the body of where this usually goes, and I will show you my knowledge in this nature to make it
Okay,
more of a debate.
cool.
You said a statement, and that started us off. I took the statement and I replied to it. But now it's up to you now to continue to say anything else. Like the floor is now open again. You know my position on it. I agree with that position. It's just that I also am familiar with the arguments against. Like now, it's up to you. Now, you feel me?
So okay, got you. I started off by saying that feminism is advocacy. So I feel like that's a strong definition because it puts it in the affirmative definitionally. Um, I want to know what the argument against advocacy is if you have one of those, because the
Okay, let me think.
advocacy part is tied into the morality part, the liberty part.
Right,
So
right.
if women can be more free economically, politically, socially, then those would be all forms of feminism. And then I wouldn't think it was the right position if it wasn't for the advocacy of that liberation. If that makes sense. So I'm curious what
Gotcha.
or any problems arise via advocacy.
So the advocacy of it is the my only argument against this, and it is the strongest position. I would not bring to you one of the weaker ones. This is the one that can actually we can talk about essentially because it will trigger something on you for you to be able to say, the advocacy area when it comes to feminism. To define what we're talking about, we're saying it is a human right that people should have for existing. When you are born a woman, however, you often are born into unjust, uh, unethical situations just because you happen to not be strong enough, as in society has made you weak.
Yeah.
Society has made you weak intentionally. So now that you're not strong enough to defend yourself, you're often stuck in there. And now what we mean by advocacy, we mean people who aren't stuck in it have the moral obligation to advocate for those who are stuck in it. And this is the advocacy area. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Just
So obviously,
any person doing the
so
advocacy would be
right.
doing feminist work.
Correct. Exactly. And now I'm saying, obviously, your boy over here isn't obviously doing. I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part of advocacy. I'm killing it. However, uh, there is an argument against it. Here it is.
Okay.
For someone to be born equal, this entails that they should be capable of dominating the other person rather than getting dominated themselves on an equal playing field. If you are born man, if you are born woman, both should have equal opportunity to dominate each other. Throughout human history, man has dominated woman. Oof, oof, oof. There has not been equal, there has not been balance. This is a fact. But now that society has done the wrong thing, we move into a new area. And in this new area of society doing the wrong thing, now we're saying, well, now that you did the wrong thing, you are now obligated to correcting yourself. And if you do not correct yourself by advocating and you just stay quiet because you happen to be born privileged as a man who was not born weak, you're born privileged. You're doing something wrong by staying quiet and not speaking. This is the area of my opposition. It is to say, telling someone that staying absolutely quiet and not advocating is anti-feminist. This just it's I cannot stand for telling someone you're doing something wrong by not talking, you're doing something wrong by not doing the right thing, you're doing
Hmm.
something wrong by not doing the I can't tell someone you're doing something wrong by not doing the right thing when I am telling people you're doing something wrong when you do the wrong thing. You're doing something wrong if you see someone else doing the wrong thing and you don't stop them. Now if you are a man who doesn't see it for himself, obviously this guy is not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about a man who sees a woman getting abused, okay? And yet he still chooses not to speak up and stop the abuse. I cannot go down the path of saying that he's doing something anti-feminist by simply not advocating for the woman who's suffering. Does that make sense to you?
I mean, yeah, and I happen to agree with you about that. Like, it's the feminism is increasing the liberty of women in those three areas
And
specifically. Advocacy.
to where they don't need to be advocated for. They need to not be advocated for. They should be strong initially without no one needs to be advocated for. Everyone should be self-strong. No one should oppress the other. However, now we're in a case where they do need the advocacy. I know they were born weaker because of social norms, not because of physical. Who cares about that? They're born weaker in society because of social norms. But I cannot get behind saying that you're doing something wrong by not advocating. You can still be feminist without advocating. How crazy is that? But that's my position.
Well, yeah, you can. So any activity that aids in that liberty would be doing the work of feminism. So
Right.
obviously, since I
And
think
so
that's the
even if you don't
correct.
do advocacy, you still can, is what you're saying. You're saying
Well,
there's other ways to
if
be a
you don't do the
feminist.
advocacy, you would be taking a neutral position. So I agree with you. That's not
Okay.
anti-woman,
Cool.
or that's not
But
like
but taking but take but
anti-feminist.
taking a but yeah, but taking a neutral position on a subject of an unethical balance of power, taking a neutral position could often be argued as being the wrong thing. In your case, you happen to acknowledge and accept, yeah, it's so fucked up how the world is, but no, it's not doing the wrong thing by not advocating. As long as you're not anti-feminist.
Yeah,
As long as you're not doing actions against feminism, you are not an anti-feminist. I accept this, and I'm glad
but
that we got to
yeah,
that.
I totally agree with you that. But however, the attempt to convince you, right? To convince you that yes, you
Mm-hmm.
should do that, you should be active and do feminist work. So if you're not doing the feminist work,
Mm-hmm.
you're not anti-feminist. You're just neutral. But for some, like a feminist to say, "Oh, there's this like rally next weekend. We could use the support. We could use more bodies there to pass out flyers, or something like that." So I would make an effort to try to convince you or someone like you in your position that's basically a neutral person saying, "Come do this work." So that argumentation, that convincing, that's in an effort to increase the work towards feminist and those outcomes. So I think someone approaching you and saying you should do this work on the weekend is part of feminism. So like I think those of us who are neutral in those positions might expect that from the feminists to say, "Hey, get on board
Right,
with us and do this activity." And I think that's fair.
right,
And then you have the right to say
right,
yes or no. And if you say no, that's your right. You're neutral. Anti-feminism would be the opposite of that. Anything that takes away liberties of a woman
right.
would be, and that would
Yeah,
be the real anti-feminism,
right.
right?
Anti-feminist in this, but follow. Right, 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 right. But
Yeah.
following in feminism, if someone offered you to do feminist work and instead of just saying no, you say no and then you intentionally attempt to make them feel bad for supporting such a cause rather than saying no, however, I support what you guys are doing. This isn't inherently feminist work. However, it is still not anti-feminist, as usually people say no and then they want you to stop doing that. People want the feminists to stop congregating. They want them. This is anti-feminist. I understand. So we're on the same
Yeah.
page now. Neutrality is accomplishable without necessity of advocating. However, you are expected, essentially, that you would be doing your feminist work in your own case.
Yeah.
However, baby, what I'm trying to get us to is you named three different things. You got advocacy, and I just said that's not a moral obligation. And now you said a second thing
Mhm.
on the list of the three, and I might be able to chip at that one as well. And if I chip at all three, then you see there is no obligation for people to be a feminist. And this is mind boggling to me. Like, I don't want to prove this, but if I prove that, it would suck because me as a feminist, I would prefer that it be the obligation. So I hope that the next two are things that I cannot chip away at and that I would have to yield to the strength of the positions. Can you
Well, I
please
mean,
reiterate or lead us
yeah.
on to the next things?
Before you go into the next one, I would add that I conceded that it's your liberty or a
Yes,
person's liberty to not advocate, to refuse to do the advocacy work, and they would
yes.
not be labeled as anti-feminist just by exercising their fundamental human right to their liberty.
Even though your premise is that it is the moral, uh, the correct moral ground is to do feminist work while we are currently in a state of inequality. Until we are
Uh
no
huh.
longer in a state of inequality, then
Uh huh.
it's no longer an obligation for that to be a necessity in humanity. And so, morally speaking, it's not necessary either. Go
So
ahead.
no, that's what I was going to push back on that point. So I
Okay.
concede that the liberty part doesn't entail that you're anti-feminist, but if you were approached by a feminist to do advocacy work and you had that time free, you didn't have any prior obligations, and you were able to do that work, the most moral decision would be to do that work rather than not. So the morality
Right.
is there because the need is there to increase the liberty. So anything that increases the liberty of women will be considered the morally correct position. So one should or one ought to do the work on the weekend if they're capable of it.
But when they don't, they're still a feminist though. Even if they're free and they have the energy and everything. Like, I'm not saying someone who's like, who has an excuse to say, oh no, I'm just tired, I don't, or oh no, I don't want to do that, but I want to play video games instead. I'm not even talking about, I'm talking about someone who's like, yeah, I could, but like I prefer to keep my Saturdays open. If there's activist work on a day when it was like already there, I would, but I'm not going to travel just for this. This is still not anti-feminist. You can still be a feminist with in this regard, meaning
Exactly.
it like we can get off of the advocacy thing. It's like not just like not just is it, so what, it's recommended. You see what I'm saying? I'm saying, yeah, it's recommended. So what, it's recommended. That don't mean that something has to get done. And I would like to talk about feminism from a standpoint of something that needs to get done. Please present this so that I want to give your argument to someone else and make them start working. You know what I mean? So please, let's continue on, and you be the champion of the position that you and I both defend. Oh, when we're not in this debate. In this debate, I gotta attack it, but like I usually defend it, obviously.
No, that's a good move actually. Good
Awesome.
move on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Something's wrong with my headset. I'll be right back. I just need a few seconds
Okay.
to see
Take
if
your
there's
time. Take your time. Yeah.
okay. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yup. Your
Okay.
your mic is really good, by the way. I'm glad you have a headset.
Hey, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so I did say that it was advocacy, so we defined that. Any work done towards the liberation, so that's the advocacy work. And I think that I also restated that it's the correct position morally. And then the next prong of my argument is that it's pragmatic. So the pragmatic piece is that it just makes the most sense. It's going to produce the best outcomes for men and women if women are liberated socially, politically, and economically as well. Socially, women will be liberated and more free to do more things for society. Socially, of course, that applies that they have more freedom, just like men, basically equal rights to men. And then that's pragmatic because it creates more satisfaction in society amongst men and women, that there's balance there, so that becomes a non-issue and we can focus on the more important things, which is to create a long-lasting life with lots of like not just a survival but a thriving situation. So that's
Right, right.
why
Utopia, utopia. We can actually attain a utopia if ever. Like, this is
so
a necessary thing for utopia, is that everyone is born equally with the equal amount of strength. I agree with this. But continue
yeah,
with what you're saying.
just that's the pragmatic version of feminism. And then it's in kind of like encapsulated in a political ideology of pluralism. Pluralism is the most pragmatic approach because it ensures power sharing among distinct and diverse groups. Uh, for
Mm.
example, men and women, and that produces fairness, which fulfills rights as a human, and that's why it fits to the morality. So the pragmatic part um, is also a good argument for feminism being the correct position.
For the pragmatic, I think it is pragmatically for the sake of a utopia. I gotta admit with you there. There's absolutely no disagreement with that. Pragmatically, it is the correct position to fall on in the perfect world, in the perfect utopic world. No human being should ever be able to say, "Oh no, it looks like women dominating men." Nor can they say it looks like men
Right,
dominating women.
right.
In a utopic world, yes, pragmatically, it is the correct argument, and it just makes sense down the line. It doesn't make sense to pretend today, because pretending doesn't do anything. Right now, systems need to be in place in order to make it happen, and the only way for us to reach utopia is pragmatically to put in work. And so pragmatically, you have the I agree with you that putting in work in order to make utopia happen in this world, that is
Yeah,
pragmatically, it's feminist. It is literally feminist work
uh-huh.
should be done. It should be on the list. You're right, 100%. I can't argue with
Okay,
that
cool.
for the sake of finding utopia. Yep.
Yeah, and utopia is a concept I use to like describe the moral progress of a society.
Because
So it's like,
if you get where I'm going, I'm saying like look at any conservationist traditionalist. Just ask this person. Yeah, your God, your heaven. What does it look like? Are women allowed to do whatever they want? Yes, they are, aren't they? So then
yeah,
why not heaven on earth? So yeah, I agree with you. But please talk.
sorry.
I said please talk. You. This is. I love you explaining this point.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's the pragmatic part, and um, so the truth or meaning of an idea lies in its practical consequences rather than any metaphysical attribute. So that's also a piece of feminism that it sort of doesn't elevate feminine aesthetic in any way. It's just saying that the observable practical consequence will be this equal right. So if we can call it utopic in the sense that that would be the best society possible, but then we would just apply that utopic principle to the best that we can do today. So that bringing back the example of doing the advocacy work on the weekends when you have free time. So that would be a pragmatic decision and a moral decision to spend a few hours advocating for feminist
Right. So yeah,
outcomes.
and
Yeah.
I'm with you on that one. Yeah, let's move on. This is embarrassing. My position is getting proved correct. The feminist position, obviously, because I'm a pragmatic guy. I'm a smart guy. You know,
Pragmatic,
so
yeah.
clearly,
So actually, that's been the best thing for me in this debate is the like looking at feminism a little more closely to be prepped up for a discussion with you, and then discovering pragmatic feminism as a concept has
yeah,
been basically the
right,
best part of this whole thing because
right.
it does move beyond anything like aesthetic or any type of like
Aesthetic, yeah,
yeah, just superficial. It just gets down to the consequences of it and the systems
right.
of
You're right,
power
right.
that people have equally. So um, this totally could be applied to all kinds of different diverse groups, right? Which
Of
is also
course.
good. Um, so then the final piece of my argument is just that it's applicable today. So there is still like work to do, basically. So it's the correct position because it's still an option. It's still a necessary like thing because there is inequality. And if we do have equality, then feminism will still be necessary as a concept to maintain that equality. Some of the problems today is the rescinding of rights. So abortion is a huge feminist issue, and that right has been virtually rescinded in the U.S. So that's a big thing to talk about is just maintaining and allowing for the most freedom possible socially. Um, Another one is the intersectionality piece to just make sure that women aren't excluding other women from their benefits and their gains as they move towards a more equitable world. So that's that's part of third wave feminism that I think is positive. So those are just basic. That's just like the end part of my argument is that these ideas are applicable today currently.
Right. So now I'm just gonna think out loud a little bit. Like if this was 20 years ago,
Yeah.
I'd be able to say yeah, it's applicable today, but it would crash and burn. But now that we're in 2023, it, it's still applicable today, yes. And yeah, we might crash and burn today, yeah. But in 20 years from now, we would be successful in a feminist utopia. Feminist as in both genders, not just the female gender,
Yeah.
so to speak.
The
You know what I mean?
equality part.
So
Yes.
we would have been successful if we started this 20 years ago. So coming from a point of it being applicable today, the argument against it is that things would be bad for like a couple years, maybe. At most, they could say a couple of decades. But as long as the rights haven't been rescinded, as human rights often have never been rescinded throughout human history, we've gotten more liberties as humanity, and it's never had to be taken away later on. And whenever it has been taken away, we obviously know who's that someone's at fault, as in it's been unethical. It's literally always been unanimously unethical. No one is currently a developed country that has taken away a human liberty that has first bestowed it. And so, if we bestow more liberties upon the group of those who is suffering from inequality
Hmm.
20 years ago, then right now we wouldn't be dealing with the crash and burn anymore. And so, it is applicable, although difficult and going to cause more issues in the short term, but on a decade scale, on an not just economic scale, but on an anthropological scale, like on just by looking throughout human history and seeing how it's trending. You're
Yeah.
right. We should have. It should have been applied before when it was applicable. It still is applicable, and regardless of the consequences, it don't matter. It's still worth it. It's like saying to do feminist work, you would have to jump in a pool and get wet and get muddy. Is it worth it? And the answer is, at this point, we now know, yeah, it would have been worth it 20 years ago. So yeah, hell yeah, it's worth it today. It'll be even less difficult now. So regardless of it starting and causing any problems, it still should be worked on now. It is applicable. I think your final 2 points are things that I would have to yield on. I don't think that there's anything that I can do with those. It is applicable. It is possible to say, okay, when you're born, everything's good. And if someone's unethical to you because you're a woman, that's a hate crime.
Yeah, basically.
Literally killing it. And then the same, if it's applicable to men, then as soon as men get shat on for being born a man, that's a hate crime too.
Yes.
And if as long as that starts, the sooner it starts, the better it would have been. And so even now, I got to yield on that. I don't know what I was
Thanks.
thinking that I might come up with a W, but definitely I took an L on this one. Those last 2 points, take it. But the fact that we agreed to the beginning part, it does bring us a little bit in the middle to where you see, although it is applicable and the pragmatic thing, if you don't decide to do it, you still can be a feminist. And
Mhm.
upon yielding that, I so much respect for you, because that does mean we can have a lot of silent feminists, sure. But imagine how many smart feminists we have that follow the final two of what you brought up. Would be more than enough, because then you wouldn't have opposition. You would only have people in support of it. So regardless, feminist works. Regardless of if people work for feminism, feminists will always work. I agree. That's the slogan.
Thank you. I
Feminism
appreciate
works.
the. It feels really good, the recognition, and I really appreciate dialoguing with you.
Mm-hmm.
And then thanks for affirming my 2 points there. I feel really good about that. So
Heck yeah. Heck yeah. Those
I
two, no one will ever be able to speak worse to you. And if they do, then you can clearly show them where they're incorrect, just in one area, and then that should relieve them from all the pressure of just agreeing with you in the first place.
and I really thought that we would have more of a struggle with the first part of the debate, and I was surprised that I came to like an
I'm
agreement
fast,
of what
right?
that is right away. Well, like pragmatically in a debate, you could spend like an hour just talking about definitions, and it's just so like kind of boring that
Right,
part.
right. And
So
we
I'm
can
really
skip
glad that we
that
did
because
that.
we
Yeah,
obviously know each other's intent. Our intent is
yeah.
for both of us to get closer to the truth. And so even if we don't have the exact same definition, you can say, well, yeah, let's talk about it from that definition. And we both agree, from my definition specifically, we can have silent feminists, but feminists nonetheless.
We absolutely can. That is something that I'll take away from this is the concept of the silent feminist. So I always do believe that positive and negative is like um, you have to justify those like basically like you're asserting someone's being negative, right? If they're anti-feminist, then you're asserting that they're doing something to hurt the cause, harm to liberty. But if you're not doing anything, you're just in a neutral state. So that just makes sense. And it is in a way there's like if okay, so there's an imbalance there between men and women, and it behooves men to remain silent to maintain a power system there, and then it behooves women to be more vocal. So that's kind of like ways that power structures are held in place by through silence and through like complicity. But that's not part of like I didn't take that to be your position whatsoever, right? That's a completely different like discussion. So the neutral stance is like a legitimate form, and then also the silent stance does entail an individual's like mind and capability. So like even though you might not do the work this weekend, since I know you, since I know some of your thinking a little bit more personable, I would still consider you like a feminist, even though you were like, no, I prefer to have my weekend free. I might even play some video games today, just can't do the work today. So that's like, I think that is also part of like a feminist aesthetic is like this concept of self-care anyways, right? So it's like caring is kind of like an ethic for like from a feminist point of view or from a feminine point of view. So that would be in accordance with feminine ethics anyways, which I can explain a little bit more about that, the feminine masculine ethic. So
No, you
just
absolutely not. You absolutely do not, because essentially what you're saying is, well, let's take someone who worked 30 years straight for feminism. didn't devote a single thing to themselves. Now, after 30 years, perhaps you can justify why they no longer need to continue reposting and resharing, and that now they can enjoy the world without doing such a thing, without doing any feminist work. As in, this
Exactly.
doesn't make them no longer a feminist. The fact that they stopped working, and
Yes,
so
that's true.
so the fact that you haven't started working means you could still be a feminist, just lying in wait until the moment that you start helping. This is how I believe that it
Lying
is for
in
the
wait.
entire world, and they
Hmm.
just don't know it yet. They just don't know that they're lying in wait. But what I was saying was so confusing is that we're basically justifying a group of men raping a woman, gang banging a woman, gang raping a woman, and me witness, or a person, obviously you know it's not me, but witnessing it and looking at it and saying, I'm not going to get involved because those men would kill me, or I'm scared. But then also not doing a police report because you don't want those guys to know, to like look around and say, oh, we did in front of this guy's house. It's obviously one of these guys, and then you don't want to become a target. It makes sense. But if you don't stand up, it doesn't mean you're not a feminist. It's just so mind-boggling that argument that people used to say that you're doing something wrong by not helping. It's not inherently true as long as you are following in the feminist principle of self-care, as in taking care of yourself. Because everyone thinks I need to take care of myself, then I need to take care of others. This is also a pragmatic belief system as well. Take care of myself, then
Yes,
take care of others. So
yes,
as long as you have
yes.
a logical understanding of why you're choosing not to be to do feminist work,
Hmm.
it doesn't take away from you being a feminist, unless the reason you don't want to do it is anti-feminist. And this will not ever be the case in my life.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that.
Well, I feel like we finished talking about this topic specifically, but like instead of it instead of it consuming all of our connection with each other, just realize we don't just have this in common. We probably got a lot of other in common. I live in Florida, United States. You live in another state. I just got back from kayaking today. You know what I mean? So like, regardless, we now know the conclusion of this debate. I concede there's no way to disprove logically or with communication that your position is the correct. You know the truth, and I'm glad that we have the middle ground of saying, yeah, but if someone's a feminist and not doing anything, they're just a feminist lying in wait,
Hmm.
unless they're anti-feminist. Then they're a part of the problem. I agree. We're done.
Sounds good. Sounds good. I'll go ahead and end the recording. But before